The gunshot echoed across the Brazos bottomland before Austin Harris heard her scream. He found Marbella Thompson clinging to a log in Owl Creek's flash flood, blood streaming from her temple, her wagon overturned upstream. She wasn't just drowning, someone had shot her first and left her to die.
Hello, compliments of the season. If you love heartwarming stories about life in times past, then you'd enjoy these stories. Comment where you're watching from, like and share these videos with loved ones as you enjoy them. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel too. My team and I have something free and beautiful for you once we hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. It will be shared in the community. You know, we go to great lengths to make these videos, and your support means a lot to us. Therefore, we plan to give back to you once we are able to, so be a part of what we are building.
The crack of the gunshot echoed across the Brazos bottomland like a thunderclap. Austin Harris froze mid-swing, his hammer suspended over the fence post. The sound didn't belong to the afternoon quiet of his ranch, didn't belong to the meadowlarks or the rustling cottonwoods or the distant murmur of Owl Creek. It was sharp, violent, wrong. For a moment, he thought it was a memory from Shiloh, another ghost from the war. But then he heard it, a scream, high, terrified, human. Austin dropped his tools and ran. His boots pounded across the rough Texas earth as he scanned the horizon. Then he saw the creek. Owl Creek, usually lazy and shallow, had transformed into a churning brown monster, swollen with upstream storms he hadn't even noticed gathering. Debris raced past in the current, broken branches, an overturned wagon. A woman. Austin's heart slammed against his ribs. She was half submerged, clinging desperately to a cottonwood log that bucked and rolled in the violent water. Her dark hair was plastered to her face. Blood streamed from her temple, bright red against pale skin. One arm wrapped around the log while the current tried to rip her away. Her head dipped under, came back up, barely. She was drowning. Austin didn't think, didn't plan, didn't pray. He moved. He kicked off his boots, dropped his gun belt, and dove into the freezing creek. The shock of the cold punched the air from his lungs. The current grabbed him like a fist, yanking him sideways, slamming debris into his ribs and back. He fought it with every ounce of strength he'd built from war and survival and years of working this unforgiving land. When he reached the log, his fingers were already numb. He grabbed the slick wood to steady himself and reached for her arm. "Hold on!" he shouted over the roar. She didn't answer. Her eyes were half closed, her lips blue. She was slipping away. He wrapped one arm around her waist and pulled. She came free with a sudden jerk, and the current immediately tried to claim them both. Austin kicked hard, angling toward the bank, dragging her weight through the rushing water. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed, but slowly, painfully, stroke by stroke, he got them to shore. He collapsed onto the mud beside her, chest heaving, arms shaking like he'd just fought 10 men at once. For a long, terrible second, she didn't move. Then she coughed, a harsh, choking sound that was the most beautiful thing Austin had ever heard. Her eyes opened, dark brown, foggy with fear and pain. "You're safe," Austin said, breathless. She flinched away from him, scrambling weakly backward through the mud, even though she could barely sit up. Her dress was torn, ripped at the shoulder, clinging to her body. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling violently. That's when Austin saw it clearly. The bullet graze across her temple, fresh and bleeding. Where am I?" she whispered, voice shaking. "Brazos country," he said, keeping his voice calm, steady. "My land. You're safe now." Terror flooded her face. "You're not taking me to town," she said, suddenly, desperately. "Please, not town." The fear didn't make sense, but Austin wasn't a man who forced anyone into anything. "I'm not taking you anywhere but somewhere warm," he said simply. "You'll die out here." She tried to stand. Her legs buckled. Austin caught her before she hit the ground. She stiffened in his arms, but didn't fight. He carried her all the way back to his ranch house, her head resting against his chest, her breathing shallow and fast. Inside, the single room was warm from the fire he never let die. He set her gently in the chair closest to the hearth and tossed more wood on the flames. "Get those wet clothes off," he said, turning away to give her privacy. His tone wasn't rough, just practical, the voice of a man who'd seen too many people freeze to death. She froze. Her voice shook. I won't be a bother. As soon as my clothes dry, I'll go." "You're not going anywhere. Creek's too high. Storm's still coming." The silence was thick between them. Fire crackling, her breath trembling, the wind pressing against the walls. Austin made coffee and added a generous splash of whiskey. He set a cup beside her without looking. When he finally turned back, she was wrapped in his spare wool blanket, her wet dress hanging near the fire. Her cheek was bruised, her hands trembled around the cup, her eyes stared into the flames like something terrible lived inside them. "My name is Austin Harris," he said quietly. She lifted her gaze. For the first time, something besides fear flickered there. "Marbella Thompson," she whispered. They drank in silence. Firelight danced across her exhausted face, painting shadows under her eyes. Austin didn't ask questions. Not yet. He understood danger. He understood running. Whatever brought her to his creek, bleeding and terrified, could wait until she was ready to tell it. The storm hit an hour after sunset. Rain hammered the roof like gunfire, and Marbella flinched with every crack of thunder. Austin pretended not to notice. He moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, making more coffee, checking the fire, giving her space to breathe. When he finally sat across from her at the small table, he pushed a tin plate toward her. Beans and cornbread, simple but hot. She stared at it like she didn't know what to do. "Eat," he said gently. "You need your strength." She picked up the spoon with shaking hands. After a few bites, some color returned to her face. Austin sipped his coffee and waited. He'd learned patience in the war, learned that some stories couldn't be rushed. Finally, she spoke. "My husband died 3 weeks ago." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Charles Thompson. He owned a ranch near Waco. Good land, water rights on the Brazos." Austin nodded, saying nothing. "He fell," she continued, her eyes fixed on her plate. "Drunk. Broke his neck on his own porch." She swallowed hard. "His foreman, Dalton Greer, he said Charles changed his will before he died, left everything to Greer." "Did he?" Austin asked quietly. "No." The word came out like a knife. "Charles never changed anything. He was too drunk most days to sign his own name. But Greer had papers, fake ones. And when I said they were lies, he went to the sheriff, told him I poisoned Charles, that I murdered my own husband for the ranch." Her hands were shaking so hard now that coffee sloshed over the rim of her cup. Austin reached across and steadied it, his fingers warm against hers. "So you ran," he said. It wasn't a question. "I ran," she whispered. "Took what little money I'd hidden away over the years and ran. I thought if I could get to Austin, maybe Fort Worth, I could find someone who'd listen. But Greer, he sent men after me. They caught up to me at the creek. One of them shot at me. My horse threw me, and then the wagon overturned and—" Her voice broke. She didn't finish. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire crackled and hissed. Austin stood and laid out his bedroll on the floor near the hearth. "You take the bed," he said, his back to her. She didn't argue this time, but as the fire dimmed and shadows grew long across the rough wooden walls, her voice came from the darkness behind him, soft, broken, ashamed. "Mr. Harris?" He didn't turn. His jaw tightened. "What is it?" A long pause. Her breathing was shaky, uneven. When the words finally came, they hit him like a physical blow. "Will you stay if I undress?" The question hung in the air like smoke, a raw, broken offer, an echo of fear and shame from a life he didn't yet understand, a transaction she'd learned to make to survive. Austin stared hard at the dying coals, his hands curling into fists against the floorboards. His jaw clenched so tight it ached. When he spoke, his voice came out low, rough, and final. "No one is bothering you here," he said. "Get some sleep." Behind him, she let out a quiet, choked sob. She tried to hide it, burying her face in the blanket, but he heard it anyway, every broken sound. Austin Walker lay awake on the hard floor, staring at the fire, knowing the flood had washed more than one kind of storm into his life that night. The morning light crept into the cabin slowly, pale and hesitant. Austin was already up, standing in the doorway, staring at the creek. It had calmed some overnight, but not enough. The water still ran high and fast, chewing at the banks, carrying debris downstream. No one was crossing that for days. He didn't hear Marbella stir, but he felt it. The shift in her breathing, the soft rustle of the blanket, the quiet dread settling between them like thick fog. When she finally rose from the bed, she moved stiffly, favoring her right side. Her limp was worse than yesterday. Her eyes were red, not from sleep, but from tears she'd cried in the dark. "Creek's still too high," Austin said without turning around. "I see that." Her voice was flat, empty. She dressed in silence, then stepped outside. Austin watched from the window as she limped toward the small vegetable garden behind the cabin, kneeling carefully in the dirt to pull weeds. He told her she didn't have to. She only said, "It's better than sitting." Days passed like that, slow, quiet, heavy. They shared the cabin, but not their thoughts. They cooked together, ate together, did chores side by side, but still lived like two strangers trapped in the same ghost-filled room. Yet Austin watched her more than he wanted to admit. He saw things, the way she flinched when he moved too quickly, the way she unconsciously touched old bruises on her arms, the way she never quite relaxed, always tense, always waiting for something bad. One afternoon, while she hung laundry on the line outside, her sleeve shifted as she reached up. Austin saw them, scars, thin, pale lines crisscrossing her back like someone had dragged fire across her skin. Old scars, healed but permanent. He turned away quickly, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. He knew what scars like that meant. He'd seen them on soldiers, on prisoners, on the broken. He said nothing. Not yet. Marbella watched him too, in her quiet way. She noticed things. How he never raised his voice, even when the mule kicked over a water bucket. How he flinched at sudden noises, his hand instinctively reaching for a gun that wasn't there. How he woke at night, breath fast, eyes sharp, staring into the darkness like he was seeing battlefields instead of cabin walls. Two wounded souls, circling each other in a tiny wooden prison. On the fourth morning, Austin walked inside and found Marbella sitting at the table, her shoulders shaking. She held a small photograph in her hands, staring at it like it was the only thing left in the world. He recognized grief when he saw it. He made noise on purpose, scraping his boot on the threshold so she wouldn't feel ambushed. She straightened quickly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's nothing," she said, her voice thick. "Just foolish memories." Austin didn't push. Her pain was hers to give, not his to take. But he saw the photograph before she tucked it away. A baby, tiny, dressed in white christening clothes. Later that night, he heard her whisper softly to the photograph in the dark. He had his father's eyes. The words were so quiet, so broken, that Austin pretended he didn't hear them. That night, something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in the armor they both wore. The storm outside had passed, but the storm between them was just beginning. Want to know what Marbella whispers next? Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when two broken souls finally start to heal. On the sixth evening, the silence finally broke. Austin came in from checking the horses and found Marbella at the table, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs she couldn't control anymore. The photograph lay face up on the worn wood. He stood in the doorway, uncertain. He'd faced Confederate cavalry charges with less fear than this moment required. He cleared his throat deliberately, giving her time. She straightened quickly, swiping at her tears, trying to hide the storm. "It's nothing," she said, voice raw. "Just being foolish." But Austin saw the photograph, saw the grief carved into her face. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, slowly, carefully, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "My name was on that baby," she whispered before he could speak. Her fingers traced the edge of the photograph. "Samuel. He lived 2 days. 2 days of breathing and crying and being perfect." Her voice cracked. "Charles said it was my fault, that I was broken inside, that God was punishing me for something. Austin's hands clenched under the table. "There were 2 others before him," she continued, the words spilling out now like water through a broken dam. "I lost them early. Charles blamed me for those too, said I wasn't woman enough to carry his sons." The firelight caught the tears on her cheeks. Maybe he was right. He wasn't. Austin's voice came out harder than he intended. He softened it. "Loss like that, it's not punishment. It's just cruel luck, and any man who made you feel shame for it wasn't worth the air he breathed." Marbella looked up at him, surprise flickering through the grief. Austin leaned back in his chair, his own ghosts rising. "I had a best friend," he said quietly, "James Coltrane. We grew up together, joined the army together. At Shiloh, we got separated from our unit. I hesitated, just for a second, couldn't decide which way to go." He stared at his scarred hands. "James made the decision for me, pushed me left, took the bullet that was meant for my chest, died in my arms while I tried to stop the bleeding with my bare hands. The cabin was so quiet that the crackling fire sounded like thunder. I came home 2 years later," Austin continued. "Found out my fiancée thought I was dead. She'd married someone else, had a baby on the way." He finally met Marbella's eyes. "We both lost things we'll never get back, pieces of ourselves that just gone." Marbella reached across the table. Her hand, small and scarred, covered his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Me too." They sat like that as the fire burned low. 2 people who'd survived things that should have killed them. 2 people who understood that some wounds never fully heal. You just learn to live with the ache. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Marbella fell asleep without crying. And Austin, for the first time in years, didn't wake from nightmares of Shiloh. Outside, the creek continued its slow retreat. The storm was passing, but neither of them was ready for what was coming. The rider appeared on the 8th morning, a dark silhouette against the pale Texas sky. Austin saw him first, shading his eyes against the sun as the man approached at an easy lope. Luther Hayes, a hand from the neighboring Garrett Ranch. Marbella stepped onto the porch, saw the rider, and went rigid. All the color drained from her face. Her hand gripped the doorframe so hard her knuckles turned white. "You know him?" Austin asked quietly. "No, but he might know me." Luther reined in his horse 20 feet from the cabin, nodding respectfully to Austin. "Morning, Harris. Heard you had company." His eyes slid to Marbella with open curiosity. Austin's jaw tightened. "News travels fast." "Always does." Luther shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble, but there's talk in Waco. Thought you should know." "What kind of talk?" "About a widow named Thompson, Marbella Thompson." Luther's gaze fixed on her now. "That you, ma'am?" Marbella said nothing. Her face was stone, but her hands trembled. Luther continued, his voice cautious. "Dalton Greer's been stirring things up in town. Says his boss, Charles Thompson, was murdered, poisoned by his wife. Says she ran off with money that belonged to the estate." Austin stepped forward, putting himself between Luther and Marbella. "That's a lie." "Maybe so," Luther said carefully, "but Greer's got the sheriff believing it. Got witnesses too, or so he claims. They're looking for her, Harris. Sheriff's fixing to put together a search party." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Luther tipped his hat. "Just thought you should know. I don't know what's true and what ain't, but Greer's got influence. Be careful." He turned his horse and rode off, dust trailing behind him. The silence he left was suffocating. Inside the cabin, Marbella stood with her arms wrapped around herself, shaking like she was freezing despite the warm morning. "He's right," she whispered. "Greer will say anything. He's wanted that land for years. The water rights alone are worth a fortune. Charles wouldn't sell to him, so now—" Her voice broke. "Now he's gonna take it, and he'll hang me to get it." Austin leaned against the doorframe, studying her carefully. "What else aren't you telling me?" She turned to face him, and something cracked open in her expression, raw, desperate. "Charles wasn't just a drunk, Austin. He was mean. When he lost at cards, when the ranch did poorly, when he was just in a foul mood, he took it on me. She lifted her chin, tears streaming down her face now. I saved every penny I could hide over the years, buried it in a tin can behind the barn. It was all I had, my only chance at freedom, at a future. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And the baby, Samuel, I lost him because Charles came home drunk one night and shoved me down the stairs. Austin felt something dark and violent coil in his chest, his hands curled into fists. Marbella kept talking, the words pouring out now. There were 2 others before Samuel. I lost them the same way. Charles's fists, Charles's rage. And Greer, he saw it all. He was there. He watched and never said a word. She stared at the floor. Charles and I married in front of a circuit preacher on the trail 5 years ago. He promised to file the papers in town. He never did. Legally, I was never his wife. I have no claim to anything, no rights, nothing. There it was, the whole truth, shaking in her voice. She expected disgust. She expected him to throw her out. Instead, Austin spoke with the low rumble of distant thunder. Papers don't make a person worthy, Marbella, and surviving what you survived, that takes more courage than any soldier I ever knew. He stepped closer. You're not alone anymore. You hear me? Whatever's coming, we face it together. By midnight, Marbella's fever hit hard. Austin woke to the sound of her thrashing in the bed, whimpering, her forehead burning to the touch. The bullet graze on her temple had turned angry and red, infected despite his best efforts to keep it clean. No, she mumbled, eyes closed, lost in delirium. Please, Charles, I didn't. I'm sorry. Please don't. Austin's chest tightened. He moved quickly, soaking a cloth in cool water from the basin. He bathed her forehead, her wrists, her throat, trying to bring the fever down. She cried out, fighting invisible demons, reliving horrors he could only imagine. Shh, he whispered, his voice rough but gentle. You're safe, Marbella. You're safe here. He stayed by her side the entire night. Every time she thrashed, he was there. Every time she cried out, he spoke to her, anchoring her to the present. Hours blurred together. The fire burned low. The night pressed against the windows. Just before dawn, her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her eyes opened, glassy with fever, unfocused. She stared at him like she was trying to understand something impossible. "You are the only one," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "The only one who ever touched me without wanting something back." The words hit Austin like a cannonball to the chest. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. He just held her hand and watched her eyes flutter closed again, her breathing finally evening out. He couldn't sleep after that. When dawn broke, pale and quiet, Marbella rested peacefully for the first time since the fever started. Austin stepped outside into the cool morning air, needing space to breathe, to think. The creek had calmed. The water ran clear now, low enough to cross. Soon she could leave. The thought felt like a knife sliding between his ribs. He'd lived alone for 3 years since coming back from the war, preferred it that way. No one to lose, no one to fail, no one to watch die. But now, the thought of this cabin without her, it felt wrong, empty. When he turned back toward the house, she was standing in the doorway, barefoot, wrapped in his old cavalry shirt, the fabric hanging past her knees. Her dark hair loose and wild around her shoulders, her fever broken, her eyes clear and searching. She looked fragile and fierce all at once. She stopped a few feet from him, her bare toes curling in the dirt. "Austin," she said softly. Her voice shook, but her gaze was steady. "Can I stay a little longer?" It wasn't the creek asking. It wasn't practicality or safety or convenience. It was her heart, reaching for his across the space between them. Austin's throat tightened. He couldn't trust his voice, so he just nodded, once, firm. That was the moment their lonely worlds stopped circling and began turning toward each other. Days slipped into a new rhythm after that, easier, warmer. She cooked while he chopped wood. She mended his shirts while he fixed the chicken coop. They worked side by side in the garden, their hands brushing in the soil. Their lives began to weave together in small, quiet ways. A shared cup of coffee at dawn, a smile across the table, accidental touches that felt like lightning strikes. One afternoon, Marbella borrowed Austin's horse, a steady mare named Penny.
"I want to feel the wind again," she said, her eyes bright for the first time since he'd pulled her from the creek. "I want to remember what freedom feels like." Austin watched her ride with a tight feeling in his chest, something like hope wrapped in fear. She looked beautiful, alive. Then he heard it. A scream, the terrified cry of a horse. His heart slammed against his ribs. He ran, legs burning, lungs heaving. He found Penny tangled in brush at the edge of a ravine, wild-eyed and snorting. Marbella was 10 feet down the slope, half buried in loose dirt and rocks, pushing herself up on shaking arms. "Marbella!" Austin shouted. He slid down the slope, rocks scattering under his boots. He grabbed her shoulders, his hands running frantically over her arms, her back, checking desperately for broken bones. "I'm all right," she whispered, breathless. "I'm all right." But Austin wasn't. The fear that had gripped him, the terror of finding her broken, it shook him harder than the flood ever had. Without thinking, he pulled her against him, crushing her to his chest. She melted into him. Her arms circled his waist, her face buried in his shirt. They stood like that, two battered souls holding each other as if the world was falling apart around them. When he finally pulled back enough to look at her, their faces were inches apart, breaths mixing, hearts pounding. He leaned in, almost kissed her, but then he saw it in her eyes. Not just desire, something deeper, something broken. The shadow of that first night, the woman who'd whispered, "Will you stay if I undress?" He stepped back, the moment shattered like glass, and Marbella's heart broke just a little. Their worlds are colliding in ways neither expected. Subscribe now to see what Marbella does next when everything comes crashing down.
That night, Marbella stood before Austin in the cabin, her jaw set, her hands trembling at her sides. He was carving wood by the fire, his knife moving in slow, deliberate strokes. She'd been watching him for an hour, gathering courage. "You saved me," she said suddenly. Her voice cut through the quiet. Austin's knife stopped mid-stroke. He looked up. "You care for me," she continued, her voice stronger now. "I see it in the way you look at me, the way you pulled back today. But you never let me thank you properly. You never let me—" She stopped, swallowed hard. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached up and unbuttoned the top button of the cavalry shirt she wore. His shirt. "Marbella." Austin's voice was rough, warning. "Will you stay this time?" she whispered. Her fingers moved to the second button, the third. The shirt slipped from her shoulders and fell to the floor. She stood before him in her thin chemise, firelight painting her skin gold, her old scars faint and silver against her back. But this time it wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It wasn't a transaction or an offering born from desperation. It was a woman asking to be seen, wanted, chosen. Austin crossed the room in 2 long strides. His hands came up to her face, cupping her cheeks, trembling. "I want you," he said, his voice raw and honest. "God knows I want you, Marbella. But not because you think you owe me anything. Not because you're grateful. Not because—" Her face crumpled. A tear slid down her cheek, then another, and the truth spilled out. All of it. Every beating, every lost baby, every night Charles used her like she was property, something he owned, something he could break. How she'd saved pennies for 5 years, hiding them in a tin can, dreaming of escape. How Greer had watched it all and said nothing, waiting like a vulture for Charles to drink himself to death so he could swoop in and take everything. She sobbed into Austin's chest, her body shaking apart in his arms, years of shame and fear and pain pouring out. When she finally finished, exhausted and empty, Austin held her tighter. He pressed his lips to her hair and whispered, "That doesn't make you less, Marbella. It makes you braver than any soldier I ever knew. Braver than me." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "And I need you to know something." His voice was thick. "I gave an order at Shiloh that got 23 men killed. I watched my best friend die because I hesitated. I came home to find the woman I was going to marry had given up on me. I've been alone for 3 years because I thought I didn't deserve anything good, thought I'd just ruin it." He wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "But you make me want to try. You make me think maybe I'm not as broken as I thought." Marbella's hands came up to cover his. "We're both broken, Austin." "Then maybe," he said quietly, "we can be broken together." What happened next wasn't desperate. It wasn't payment. It wasn't pity or gratitude or obligation. It was healing, slow and tender and filled with a lifetime of pain finally finding a home. Two people choosing each other with clear eyes and scarred hearts. Two people who'd survived hell and found something worth living for. They held each other through the night, whispering truths in the darkness, building something fragile and precious between them. And for the first time since the war, Austin Harris slept without nightmares. For the first time since her wedding day, Marbella Thompson felt safe. Peace never lasts long in Texas. 2 weeks later, Austin woke to the thunder of hoofbeats. He was up instantly, grabbing his rifle, his soldier's instincts screaming danger. Through the window, he saw them. 4 riders. Dalton Greer in front, flanked by 3 hired guns Austin recognized from the saloons in Waco. Hard men. Killers. Marbella appeared beside him, her face going white. "It's him!" Greer's voice boomed across the yard. "Sit out the widow, Harris! Marbella Thompson murdered her husband, and she's gonna hang for it." Austin stepped onto the porch, rifle cradled in his arms. His voice was calm, cold. "She didn't murder anyone, Greer." Charles drank himself off his own porch. Greer dismounted, his hired guns following. "You got proof? Because I got a dozen witnesses say she poisoned him, and I got papers that say Charles's land belongs to me now." He smiled, cruel and confident. "Hand her over and I'll tell the sheriff you were just being neighborly. Keep her and you're harboring a murderer." Austin's jaw tightened. Not happening. "Your funeral," Greer nodded. His men drew. The first shot exploded across the morning quiet, shattering Austin's left shoulder. He spun sideways, fired back, and dropped one of the gunmen, but there were too many. Pain screamed through his arm, blood soaked his shirt. Another gunman rushed the porch. Austin fired again, missed. The man was too close now, knife gleaming in his hand. Then Marbella was there. She appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel, Austin's backup rifle gripped in her shaking hands. For a split second, she froze. The terrified woman who'd asked if he'd stay if she undressed, the victim who'd spent 5 years cowering. Then something fierce and wild ignited behind her eyes. She lifted the rifle, aimed, fired. The shot took the knife-wielding gunman in the chest. He dropped like a stone. She fired again. The second hired gun fell, clutching his leg, howling. Greer's face went from confident to terrified in an instant. He reached for his gun. "Don't!" a voice barked from the road. The sheriff appeared with 3 deputies, rifles raised. Behind them rode Luther Hayes, the ranch hand who'd warned them days ago. He'd seen the riders heading toward Austin's land and fetched the law. "Drop your weapons," the sheriff ordered. Greer's surviving man threw down his gun immediately. Greer hesitated, then did the same, his face twisted with rage. "She murdered him! She—" "Shut up, Greer." The sheriff dismounted, walked to Greer's horse, and pulled documents from the saddlebag. Forged deeds, fake wills, all in Greer's handwriting. "You're under arrest. Murder conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder." Marbella dropped the rifle and fell to her knees beside Austin. Blood poured from his shoulder, soaking the porch boards. "Don't leave me," she sobbed, cradling his head in her lap. "Austin, please, stay. Stay with me." His face was pale, but he managed a weak smile. "Not going anywhere," he whispered. Then his eyes closed. Marbella screamed. The sheriff and Luther lifted Austin, carried him inside. The doctor from Waco arrived within the hour, summoned by one of the deputies. He dug the bullet out, stitched Austin up, and told Marbella grimly, "He's strong. If infection doesn't set in, he'll live." She never left his side, not for 1 minute. Austin healed slowly. The fever came hard on the second night, and Marbella fought it like she was fighting death itself. She bathed his forehead with cool water, whispered to him when he thrashed in delirium, held his hand when he called out names of men who died at Shiloh. "You're here. she whispered over and over. "You're safe. You're home. You're mine." He always found her voice, always came back. 6 weeks later, Austin could stand without help. His shoulder was stiff, the scar ugly, but he was alive. One evening, he found Marbella on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Brazos River gold. She looked different now, stronger. The haunted look in her eyes had softened into something peaceful. He lowered himself carefully into the chair beside her, his shoulder protesting. They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment. Then Austin spoke. "Marbella." She turned to look at him. He took her scarred hands in his. "I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life," he said, his voice steady and sure. "If you'll have a broken-down rancher who still dreams about dead men." Tears filled her eyes, spilling over. "Only if you'll have a widow who carries too many ghosts." He smiled, leaned in, kissed her long and deep, sealing the promise without fancy words or papers or witnesses, just two people choosing each other. They married 3 weeks later under the cottonwood trees by Owl Creek, the same creek that nearly took her life, the same place where Austin had pulled her from the flood and changed both their futures. Luther Hayes stood as witness. The circuit preacher from Waco performed the ceremony. This time, Austin filed the papers in town himself, made it legal, made it real. They built their life on the ranch over the years that followed. Hard work and warm light and love that grew slow and strong, like mesquite roots gripping Texas soil. They healed each other, piece by piece, day by day. Some mornings, Marbella still woke from nightmares. Austin would pull her close, whisper her back to peace. Some nights, Austin still dreamed of Shiloh. Marbella would hold him until the ghosts faded. On quiet evenings, when the sun melted into gold behind the hills, they rode together along Owl Creek. Austin would look at her the way he did that morning she'd asked to stay, the way a man looks when he's finally found peace. And Marbella would whisper, soft as a prayer, "Will you stay now?" Austin always smiled, always pulled her close. "I'm not going anywhere, Marbella. Not ever." The ghosts didn't leave them. War and loss and pain don't just disappear, but they learned to live with them together. They learned that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about choosing each other every single day, scars and all. Years later, when their children played by the creek and the ranch thrived under their hands, Marbella would sometimes stand at the water's edge and remember the flood, the fear, the moment she thought she would die. And then she'd remember Austin diving in after her, choosing her, saving her. Not just from the water, but from everything that came after. She'd whisper to the creek, to the cottonwoods, to the Texas wind, "Thank you." Because sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Sometimes drowning is just the beginning of learning how to breathe. And sometimes the loneliest people find each other in the most unexpected ways and build something beautiful from all their broken pieces. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods, the creek ran clear and calm, and two people who thought they'd lost everything discovered they'd found what they needed most: each other, home. Austin and Marbella's journey from drowning to devotion proves that even the most broken hearts can heal. Subscribe now so you never miss a story of hope, courage, and second chances.
If you enjoyed this latest story on life in the Old Wild West, then I'm sure you will love the next one coming up. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you can get updates on time. Did I tell you we post new, exciting, heartwarming stories daily? Subscribe now to join us so you won't miss any new stories.